Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'm going to show you a classy positional performance and played in a Blitz game as well. So this is the second tiebreak game in the match between Rameshbabu Praggnanandhaa and Magnus Carlsen. So Prag won the first Blitz tiebreak game. This is the second tiebreak game, and of course Carlsen in a must-win situation as he lost the first Blitz game, so he needs to win this one to get to an Armageddon. And he decides to play a modern. He's offering the modern, which Prag accepts. So yeah, he wants something where the tension is still alive somehow, and you're not running down 20 moves of theory. And Prag plays bishop c4, which I've always thought is a very reliable way for white to play. It can be rather dangerous sometimes. There's a very nice trick here actually. If knight d7, then bishop takes f7 is very strong because that traps the queen. There are other variations too, but you get the idea. So knight f6, the normal move. Queen e2, and that supports the e-pawn and potentially supporting an advance. In fact, after knight c6, it is very interesting to play e5 and then drive right through with e6. But okay, that's for another day. And instead, Prag puts the brakes on with h3. Normally, I don't like these little pawn moves at the side of the board, but that's to prevent bishop g4. And then black would get some pressure here. It's actually not a bad move. And now e5 really does look like a serious threat. So that's why Carlsen blocked with e5. And now white needs to do something about the pawn on d4. So Prag exchanges. So that kind of calms things down after these exchanges, because of course now that bishop is locked in behind the pawn. And in fact, well, I prefer white here anyway. I mean, you could say this is a slight advantage, but it's a very pleasant advantage for white, just because that bishop is on a really good diagonal. I mean, apart from that, it's a roughly symmetrical position with these pawns here. But at the moment, white's pieces are better. Castle's played here. I think knight h5 is an interesting move actually. So if rook d1, then the queen comes out to f6. But okay, that's another story. But Castle's played by Carlsen. Rook d1, attacking the queen, and then b3, looking to play the bishop out to a3 to hassle the queen. So Carlsen under a bit of pressure. Now remember, he's in a must-win situation, and so I wouldn't say this is the ideal position he's got out of the opening. Looks just very pleasant for white, a small positional advantage for white, but perhaps more important, a very stable position for white. c6, that has to be played to cover these squares, and now it's kind of automatic. You as white, you don't want to allow that pawn move b5, you play a4 just to stop b5, very important. And also allows white to gain space sometimes with a5. Queen e8, and that is preparing to bring the bishop to e6. Now where would you put that bishop? Do you put it to a3 looking down this diagonal? Or do you put it to e3? I think Prag selects the best move. Bishop e3. Bishop looks down two very important diagonals. I mean, this one stops the bishop popping out to h6. That's one thing. But also looks at the pawn on a7. And it's just harder for black to bring that rook into the game, or it takes time because the bishop threatens that pawn. So Prag playing excellently and still with a slight advantage. And now he takes control of the d file because the rook cannot challenge, because that pawn could be taken. So Carlsen in a must-win situation with black, and slightly worse as well, in a very stable position, so not exactly what you want. Okay, so I'll hand it over to you. How would you play here with black? The fight back starts here. Black to play, what would you do? Cheers. Carlsen played bishop f8. Good move. That bishop isn't going anywhere. So he claims this diagonal and starts to activate that bishop. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes. Now that's harder for the rook to come to the open file. So that's why Pragg did that. And rook d3 played. So just looking to double on the d file. Very sensible. So Carlsen played a6. That means that now the rook is free to move. And queen d1. So still, I would say white is slightly better in this position because white now has control over the d file. And here Carlsen could play b5, but instead he went bishop b4, and I think it's a good move actually. So he threatens to exchange off the knight and then take the pawn on e4. So that's why f3 was played. And now, again, a very nice move from Carlsen. I think these last sequence of moves from the world champion, excellent. Queen e7. So he's activated the dark squared bishop. And, well, sometimes he might be able to exchange off, but it's looking more likely that he'll play the bishop to c5 to exchange off that powerful bishop on e3. King h2 played. And now b5. So again, this is the fight back starts, because it might be possible to take here sometimes and then exchange on a4. That's one possibility. But in any case, the pawn on b5 claims some very nice space. It means that later on you don't have to worry about that pawn coming to a5 to clamp those three pawns. So b5 looks very desirable. And here, I mean, black is pretty close to equality. Knight a2 played, hitting the bishop, which just nudged back to c5. Bishop takes bishop, queen takes. And after Pragg's next move, well, I think really all his advantage had gone. I mean, white can still try to squeeze something from this position, perhaps with rook c3. And then go for an exchange of queens. You know, this is actually quite interesting. You know, this is a very forcing variation actually. And white, I think, is still a bit better there. Difficult position to control when the king could be better. Queen is active. I mean, maybe a safer way to play is queen d2, which controls a lot of these squares here. Because of the control on the d file, I think white still has the better position, but black is definitely fighting there. For example, you can exchange and put the knight on h5, looking at these squares, and white doesn't want to play g3 because that will expose the king. But white's still just a fraction better. Instead, Pragg took on b5, definitely a mistake, because that opens the a file. Now, I mean, the reason Pragg did this, I mean, he doesn't want to leave that rook on a8, was because immediately he's exchanging rooks. But basically what he's done with these exchanges is he's just saying, okay, I want to draw now. It's getting a bit too complicated. A draw is enough for me to win the match. I'm just going to play very steadily. But still, very impressive play from Carlsen over the last, let's say, 10 moves. He's basically managed to equalise with some excellent moves. And now he's even looking to take the initiative. the knight looks at these squares. That could be rather nice if white is careless and allows the black queen in. Knight b4, knight f4, c3, everything is secure. h5, take care, if that pawn comes to h4, then that knight is permanently embedded on the f4 square. So h4 is necessary. And actually slowly white is getting ready to play g3. Carlsen preempts that with knight e6, good square anyway. Knight d3, attacks the queen, queen d6, queen e3. Position is level, c5. It's level, but that doesn't mean it's drawn. Because Carlsen, remember, he needs a win. And he's just squeezing here. Knight f4. Finally, Pragg plays g3. But that's what Carlsen wants. Whose king is safer? King on g7 or the king on h2? Well, obviously the king on g7 is safer. Because it's got a pawn on f7, covering the 7th rank. The diagonal is closed. White's king is just a little bit insecure because that pawn has advanced to f3. Well, both pawns have advanced to the 3rd rank. So it means at some stage there could be a check on the 2nd rank. Position is still level, but it's white that has to be careful. Well, of course, exchanging queens would just lead to a draw, and Carlsen doesn't want that. He keeps the queens on, queen b6, and he's toying with the idea of playing c4, of course, in this position. So king g2 played. Queen d5 would have been a better move. But king g2 is one of those reflex moves you play in a blitz game just to keep everything protected. But now the queen creeps around the side, getting closer. Now white should play queen c2 here. A little bit passive, but that should be played. Instead, Pragg played c4. By this stage, both players had seconds left. They were just playing close to the increment, basically. And after b4, black is better because the b3 pawn is a target. Queen d5, attacking this one, but now, whoops, attacking that pawn. Now the queen comes down to a1, protecting the pawn on e5. Isn't that knight on e6 beautifully placed? Covers the c5 pawn, can potentially leap into d4 as well to attack the pawn on b3. So yeah, if the queen falls back, well, you can see how combination of knight d4, queen b2, the b pawn is going to drop very quickly here. Not to mention queen c3 as well. Knight d3, attacking this one. A check. And Carlsen makes the breakthrough. He's taken that important pawn on b3. So he's getting very close to victory now. If queen check, the king just goes to h7. In fact, the king is perfectly safe here. The knight can always cover. Knight e5. Queen b1, threatening mate. There you go. I told you that king is insecure. That's the problem. It can't find a secure home on the king side. Mate threatened, so the king has to come back. Another check. And the pawn advances. Knight d3, queen c3, and b2. Well, black is winning. Not only are there threats to the king, but this pawn is coming through as well. And Pragg took the b pawn. And here, knight f4 check is winning instantly. And then you take the knight with check, and checkmate on g2. But Carlsen just played queen takes b2. I mean, maybe this was even a pre-move. He just whipped the knight off. Of course, he's winning. He has an extra piece. But you've still got to finish the game. f5. But, I mean, black is actually very well coordinated here. Queen a1 threatens mate again. That gains a little bit of time because they were playing on the increments. I think they got 3 seconds each time they made a move. And here, g takes f5. That's okay. Queen b2 check, again, gaining a little bit of time. Okay, what would you play here? Black to play. Carlsen to play with black. You've got to win this game. What are you going to do? Your king is getting a little bit exposed here, but it's still not too bad. When the knight moves, you've got to watch out for queen takes pawn. So what should black play here? Carlsen played queen c1. He thought he was threatening mate on h1 again, but after that pawn exchange, the queen on d5 actually covers the h1 square. A terrible blunder. And after this, queen e5 check. In fact, white is winning. Here, Carlsen resigned. I mean, he could have played on here, but there's no doubt that he is lost in this position. And, well, basically white has consolidated, and then you can push the pawns. There's still a long way to go, but, well, remember that white only needs a draw to win the match, and Carlsen, by this stage, had had enough. A terrible blunder. Let's go back to that position. Here, check, here. So not queen c1, but knight f8 is a good move. And after queen takes c5, knight h7. I really like this maneuver. Once the knight sits on f6, it secures the king, protects the king, but also threatens to go onto the attack with knight g4 and set up a mating neck on the king side. It's a really beautiful maneuver. So yeah, in this position, knight f8, h7, f6, and black is still winning. Well, what a finale. So Carlsen lost those 2 tiebreak Blitz games. Pragg won the match, but only by 2-1. So that meant that Carlsen still won the tournament. I thought it was a really interesting game. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm leaving the FTX Crypto Cup, and I'm going to move on to other topics now. Thanks for watching.